Good afternoon. I'm here with two well-known experts in the field of crisis communications. To my immediate right is David Craig, who's the EVP of Digital at Weber Shandwick, with a focus on crisis management. And next to him is Mike Paul, otherwise known as the Reputation Doctor, who I guess could fix anyone's reputation and has more a holistic view of approaching crises. I just wanted to ask a quick question of how many of you actually have a crisis plan in place? If you could raise your hands. Okay, so that's good to know. It's just some feedback for these guys as we go forward. Yeah, or how, some version of something, if something were to happen, how you would go about handling it. What was that? Oh, it's in your head. Okay, that's good. Somewhere. So the way we want to set up the panel is to go through 3 different scenarios and have each of the panelists address that and how they would respond, or to give some best practices on each of the situations. The first one is an errant tweet. So something where someone from the agency or an official from the company tweets something out that's inappropriate. I mean, we think of many situations where this has happened. The Red Cross is one of the situations where the community manager thought she was tweeting from her personal Twitter handle, but she was intoxicated while she was tweeting. So it got a lot of media pickup, and we wanted to address this. I mean, that's one situation, but just the whole idea of a tweet that's out there, and do you take it down? How do you react in these situations? And if you could address when is there a time to actually do nothing as you're considering these responses? So David, why don't you go first and sort of set it up a little bit?
Yeah, great. So if you're not familiar with that Red Cross story, I think it's a good place to start. It was about 3 years ago that it happened, and it was a legitimate accident. And the gist of the tweet was, I'm out drinking this great beer and I'm slightly slizzard, was the word that she used, if some of you remember that word. Suddenly became a popular word in Twitter. Within a matter of minutes, the Red Cross responded in a way that I think that caught a lot of our attention, especially when it was 3 years ago. Even though that was only 3 years ago, that was a long time ago in kind of the arc of social media crisis. And I think it hit a lot of us in the industry pretty hard, or interestingly, because of the response of the Red Cross, which was not just to take it down and say nothing and pretend it didn't happen, not to take it down and say we fired this person, not to overreact. So rather what they did was they made light of it in a respectful way, saying, whoops, sorry about that, everyone. That was not meant to go out on this channel. And don't worry, we've taken her keys away from her. Just a lighthearted way of saying, yep, saw that, we all make mistakes, right? And I think we were all impressed, or many of us were impressed, shouldn't speak for everybody, we're impressed by the response that the Red Cross gave in that particular instance. And that, again, was 3 years ago, and there have been many instances since then, and a lot of them do happen in the similar way, not necessarily with the introduction of alcohol into the situation, but getting confused, which handle am I on? Am I on my personal handle? Am I on my own? Am I on the handle for the company that I'm working for? Really easy to make those mistakes because of the way that the systems are set up. You're in a hurry, you're on your phone, et cetera. It's late hours. And I think there's some acceptance, which I think is good, and acceptance happening if it's a mistake, if it's a legitimate mistake. We don't need to say the sky is falling and overreact, and I think by and large that was a great response from the Red Cross. Mike?
How you guys doing? I've got a different take, and there's nothing wrong with having more than one take, because many times there's more than one right answer. I take a more holistic approach. I do a lot of crisis management, less crisis planning, only because most clients wait until they're actually in crisis to call me. But here's what I say about it. Number one, it wasn't really a crisis. It was a mistake. And glad that the organization realized that it was a mistake versus a crisis. Big difference between the two, right? Second, I think that it's not as easy just to say, oh, we recognize it and we're going to handle it from a perspective of understanding that this was a one-time thing, and we're going to pinpoint that and let you see that we recognize it's a one-time thing. We're going to move on because we have really important work to do. We actually solve crises for a living around the world. I think that's great. But if they were my client, I'd be adding a lot more than that. There's a reason why she thought that even making the mistake wasn't a huge slap on the wrist, even when you're drunk, which is who's in charge of social media is no different than who's in charge of putting a story on the front page of the New York Times. Okay? And what I mean by that is, if you realize that these kind of mistakes can happen, if the company has a very strict policy about who can tweet, you'd have a very different perspective. I see a lot of companies having very wishy-washy policies. They say, well, duh, everyone in the company should know that they are not allowed to speak for us. Well, the only way they're going to know that is you have to tell them. And I think you have to put a little bit of the fear of God in them to make sure that they understand what's going to happen if you speak for the company. That goes to culture. And a lot of our discussion is going to be around culture. Trust me, there are many global corporations that this mistake wouldn't even have happened because that person doesn't have access to it at 2 in the morning. So think about that. It's not just a one-off. There's an opportunity to really use this as a lesson for your organizations too, as to what are the rules, especially from the C-suite looking down, or especially from those who are in charge of social media globally or nationally for their company. This is a big deal, and you really have to peel back the onion to get a policy together from a cultural perspective as to how do we tweet in general, and how do we make sure that, yes, there'll be some mistakes, but this shouldn't have been the kind of mistake that that company made, because she shouldn't have had access to it through, what was it, Hootsuite? Probably. At 2 o'clock in the morning, for it to go out that way. Maybe her own, yes, but she shouldn't have access to it at all.
Yeah, if I could just elaborate a little further, I don't disagree with any of that. I think it's there might be a little hindsight as 2020 at play, given it was 3 years ago, in that we are all, this industry collectively, are figuring out what it means to be doing what we're doing. And I completely agree, she should not have been in a situation where you can have both profiles on one phone through Hootsuite, that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're dealing with, not just in this one isolated incident, and I hope that that's coming across here about this one incident, is that we are all learning about what the new tools are and what they mean to us. So I can imagine, having worked with community managers and having worked with organizations in this way, especially 3 years ago, it was all about engagement, and still is, all about the conversation, right? So there's this weird pressure to, I would love it if my community manager wanted to be tweeting at night, because that shows the Red Cross as being human and engaging no matter what time the people are communicating with us. So there's this pressure to like, yep, go out there, and if you want to be present 24/7, we love that, that's awesome. And then, to your point, forgetting about the risk of that, forgetting to stop and say, okay, well, it's wonderful that we are 24/7 and can be always on, but what are the risks of that? And I think that's where the social media policy and the governance needs to come in play for all the organizations like you're talking about, to ask yourself all those hard questions. Great, we're engaging always, but what does that mean? What are the risks that come involved so we don't fall into this particular trap?
And I would just add to that, I'm a tougher counselor, I think. I'm more of a pain in the neck. I'm the guy that's willing to take the risk to make sure a client knows you're really screwing up. So here's what I would say back to that if my client said that across the table. Stop making excuses. They call it social media for a reason. We wouldn't send a press release out 2 o'clock in the morning when you're having a beer. This is a powerful tool. You touch your finger, it goes out around the world, and everyone's going to know about it. That's the kind of counsel that they need to hear. That's the kind of counsel that anyone that is working in a company, I believe today, when they learn from this lesson, needs to hear. It could cost money. It could cost a stock price. It could cost a loss of a client. It's not a small thing. This time, it didn't turn into a crisis. It was a mistake. But if you're looking for policies and you're looking to really change culture and you're looking to have a rule, a best practices approach across the globe or across the nation, you got to be tougher than that. That's just my counsel.
Anything? Do you have any best practices, just general ideas you'd like to toss out to people?
Well, it's a really generalized statement, but I'm a strong, Weber are a strong proponent for having a social media crisis policy in place and governance and all of those rules that are absolutely necessary to stop not only just this one anecdotal situation, this issue from happening, but much more significant, larger business business implications. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at is right now we have this inertia behind this overzealous, let's all go converse, engage, all those cliches we've been saying. And not enough organizations are stopping and saying we need to get the foundation in place first before we go out and do this, because there is this weird pressure like, what, you're not on Twitter? Are you really a reputable company? It's a ridiculous proposition, but we do have this kind of, this overzealous, as I said, kind of pressure as organizations, as communicators to be out there, and that is pushing us too quickly. It's like somebody pushing you from behind and you're running, and eventually you're going to fall down unless you get things in line to begin with. So that would be the best practice is simply just preparation in advance.
Okay, great. Do you want something? Oh, we can move on. All right. So the next scenario is unsanctioned content, which we'll take one situation. Many of us work at agencies, and entering awards is really important to the agency culture. But what happens when an agency creative enters an award show that hasn't been approved by the client, and it wins? The client finds out and is quite unhappy because they didn't want the agency either to get recognized for it, or they just had a strict policy against promotion of their work. So Mike, do you want to address this first?
Sure. It doesn't have to be you, but I'd love to see by a show of hands, has anyone either heard this happen in their agency, heard this happen with a client, or heard this happen with somebody else? And you agree that this happens a lot. The stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, really. The stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, and here's why. I think social media is extremely important. You got one of the top guys in the world sitting to my left. But if we're not thinking about all of these things from a holistic approach, from some bigger rocks, some bigger umbrellas, ethics, morality and decision making, thinking a couple of steps ahead as to what's going to happen after you do that. All the examples we're talking about on the stage, are you an intelligent person, right? I'm going to take, who's seen the movie Wag the Dog? What's one of the best scenes towards the end of the movie? Robert De Niro says, take him. Why is he saying take him? He wanted to take credit for his work, right? And basically saying when you work for the government, especially in this situation, that's a big no-no. We know you did a great job, but I want to tell the world. I want everyone to know about it. That's what we're talking about here. You have a confidentiality agreement with your client. Obviously, your client must approve anything that's going to use their name. And they're obviously tracking their own name. So whose bright idea is it to put an award in for it to potentially win, even before it's in the contest, right? Someone on the other side, within that governing body that is giving the award says, hey, this sounds like a great idea. Company so-and-so is in for this award. Company so-and-so, I work for that company. What are you talking about? We're in for an award? Oh yeah, your agency put you in for an award. That's just nuts to me. Absolutely nuts, right? You need to have the kind of relationship with your client that should never happen. If your client has told you, and guess what, you know if your client's the kind of client that either wants you in an award ceremony or not, right? Here's your worst case scenario. The client is so pissed off that they fire you, they call the award ceremony, they say, sorry to embarrass anyone that's a part of this, but we had nothing to do with this. It was never approved by us. We really don't want to be in it. And then you're the laughing stock and an example. That could happen today, especially in our social media world, in a couple of seconds. It's not worth it. Make sure that you have a client that either lets you do it or respect their opinion and advice to not be in it. Doesn't matter if everybody else is doing it. Do the right thing. Your integrity is too important to take that risk.
David?
I guess the only thing I can add to the, obviously it's a bad move in all regards. And I would just say in addition to the ethics side, the morality side that you're discussing is just the pure business side, which is clearly just as relevant because you're going to lose if you end up doing that anyway, you're going to lose your reputation, you're going to lose potentially the business of the client. And I'd like to think, back to governance again, most, at least in the world that I'm in, most master service agreements, contracts with our clients already have that in place, saying you may use this for an award or you must check to use this for an award. I think sometimes, a lot of times award entries fall on some of the more junior staff who might not even be aware of the fact that that's in the MSA or not in the MSA, that kind of thing, and they are, again, driven to celebrate and make the mistake of not doing their due diligence and double checking to make sure that that is appropriate for the client. Adding on to the point that Mike touched on is, of course, on the social side, which is not an excuse in any way. It's just to say the scenario where, every time an award is won by an agency, 5 people in the audience tweet, "We just won an award." So it's going to be public anyway. It's going to be public immediately, instantly, and all that kind of thing. And it just exacerbates the potential for embarrassment if you have to, retract that or redact that, saying, "Whoops, we were not supposed to actually submit that award. Our apologies."
So that brings up another question about public apology.
I would just interject
Okay.
one thing to that. I can't let the junior staffer excuse go by. I've judged almost every major award that's out there, okay? I've been on the drafting side. I've been a judge myself. I know it inside and out. A junior person might be drafting it, but you'll be darn sure that someone higher than that is approving the budget, because it costs money usually to put these awards in, number one. And 2, before it goes out the door, someone more senior is saying, what are the 8 that I told you to write up? Or what are the 3 that we decided we were going after? So that is a bunch of hogwash. Just is. And we got to get away. These are the things that cause the crises to happen. These are the reasons why you have crisis PR professionals sitting on the stage. If you think these excuses are okay, they're not. They're just not.
I would interject, it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. It's similar to, you were driving drunk, you ran into a car, you ran into that car because you were drunk. That's not an excusing the fact that you ran into the car, it's just, this is what happened. And I think we have to be more diligent about our process and procedures like you're talking about. I'm not trying to say, oh, don't worry about it, that was just a junior staffer. I'm just saying, I can visualize, because I've seen how things like that happen, as an explanation.
Did you, excuse me, would you address the public apology? Like what would your advice be to a situation like this?
Any type of public apology?
No, the situation the scenario we just went through.
You have to be 110% honest. It's the only way you're going to get out of it. And here's why. If you are not honest today, in any situation, take social media out of it for a second, just in life. If you're not honest, you put a price on your head for somebody to find the truth. You got to remember that. That's a big deal, right? The twists and turns that we see in every major crisis that's in the news today is an editor or a producer, and they're all over the world following stories, by the way. Sometimes you're talking thousands of them. You put the price on your head when you don't give the complete answer. And the editor and the producer smile and say, keep digging, because I don't think we got the whole truth. Find out, look, we want this as a front page story tomorrow. You put a price on your head. We forget that. That's why these stories have legs, and finally there's such pressure that we either found out by another source or the person finally says the truth days later. Sometimes it's not even sincere. They're sorry that they got caught versus truly changing their heart and their attitude about it. How many examples of that are in the news right now? So a true apology has no ifs or buts in it. It's one of my big rules. It has to be a repentant change. You have to truly mean it. Case in point, Paula Deen, a lot of people don't believe her. She's supposed to apologize about 10 times now, right? It's not working. It's not working because you don't memorize a script. You change your heart, right? We teach our kids that before they enter kindergarten, but we as adults stink at it.
David, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with that. It's one of those wonderful moments where not only is it the right thing to do as a human being, but it's the right thing to do for your business, for your agency, to make that, legitimate apology if that situation were to happen, and just explain, we made a mistake, we should not have done that, we apologize.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the third scenario, a human resource problem, and just keeps getting better here. The agency becomes the subject of a diversity suit, And how do you respond to the media under those circumstances? David, do you want to take the first crack at this?
So you mean, or we mean, the media writ large, so social media, traditional media, all mainstream.
Exactly.
That is, to your point, it just gets worse and worse or better and better depending on how you're looking at it. That's one of the most complicated topics to start to address, and it would all depend on the arc of where these accusations are, what the conversation is. Because I think one of the mistakes that people make in social media during a crisis, any crisis, is to not fully understand all of the facts in play, so they come out with a statement that is premature, adds to the problem when there wasn't a problem, or if there is a severe problem, they make it worse because they minimized it the first time out, right? So in the case like a diversity accusation, you'd want to be darn sure that you had all of the facts as you understood them in play, so that when you went out there and started to have this open conversation about it, that you were being truthful, factual, and smart about it.
I think we'd need to know a little bit more about the details for us to give a more complete answer. But full disclosure, the industry overall has struggled with diversity, as we know, for a long time. 2006, there was some serious action that was happening in the industry if you worked at it at the time. More full disclosure, the 4A's had hired a crisis PR consultant to help with that problem back then. That consultant was me. And I think there have been some changes. I think there still needs to be more. One of the big stats that doesn't help, for example, when some folks went before the city council hearing, the Human Rights Commission, and had to answer some tough questions. Some of the questions were like, the media capital of the world is New York City. There's about 9 million people that live here. 3/4 of the people that live in the 5 boroughs of this city are people of color. And we're hearing that approximately 2 to maybe 4% overall are working in advertising, and even less in senior management positions. That's a tough question, right? So I think it's an issue that we still grapple with. I don't think it's just a numbers game. I think it's a cultural game, in that there's some major cultural change that's happened within organizations for us to really get to where I think we all want to be. But it's one that's not going to be dealt with overnight. It's going to take a while. And it's going to take a lot of patience, ethics, morality, decision-making, and a champion or champions throughout the industry to really bring lasting change.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one question before we open it up to Q&A, a little bit about timing on crises and sort of what the arc, your experiences have each been as far as response time.
Speed is your friend in general, but sloppy speed so that you fully don't understand the issue could be your biggest enemy. So there's a fine line there. One of the things I always tell my clients that we sometimes forget is it's okay to communicate, especially to the media and some key stakeholders, that you need more time. Meaning, in day one, if you don't have enough facts, but you're feeling the pressure that you've got to say something in day one, and you really don't have enough of the details yet, it's okay through your spokesperson, especially someone that's helping with crisis communications, to simply say, we have heard that there's a situation, we're examining it closely, we're doing our research, we'll be in touch with you very soon, hopefully within the next 24 hours, but we're on it. That's okay to say. What is a problem is when you say nothing and then people are guessing what your attitude is internally. That's a big problem, right? We even have that with our friends. Haven't heard from him in 24 hours. Said he was coming to the city. I changed my plans. Where the heck is he? Half hour before, gives you a phone call, right? We get upset about those things sometimes because we're assuming that their attitude is in the wrong place. Well, just communicate and make sure that people understand what you're doing. And you fill the void of information, because if that void isn't filled by you proactively, people are guessing, and guessing is going to hurt you.
110% agree with that. I would add, there's a nuance in social media, and I think we're, from a behavioral science perspective, we're figuring out social media, right? What does it mean? What is actually going on? And by that I mean a couple things. We are unable, I'm going to start over. Lucky Brand, a couple years ago, I think is the perfect example. We have an expectation as human beings, as people that are engaged in social media, to subconsciously or even consciously expect a company to be like a human being, to be like a person. So we're all talking to them about an issue, and for whatever reason, culturally, we expect that company to respond just like we're talking to them, as if it were one person talking to one person. If you work at an agency or at an organization, you know how unrealistic it is to have that expectation. So Comcast, a good example, if you go to Comcast and type in and just search for the tag like, hey Comcast, or Comcast sucks, what you will see is that there are a lot of people in social talking to Comcast as if it was a person named Mr. or Mrs. Comcast, saying, hey Comcast, why is my cable down? That's an absolutely valueless text, right? Because the person manning that Twitter profile is saying, well, I don't know who you are or anything about you. But you can see it in the way that people talk in social, that they have this expectation that companies today are like a person. So back to Lucky Brand then. A couple years ago, they were in a situation where somebody just stole their name and used a phishing email campaign, pretending that it was coming from Lucky Brand and trying to get them to click on a link to go give their credit card information via email. Lucky Brand was completely not responsible for this, right? Somebody just decided, I'm going to steal this brand's name because I think that a lot of people will follow me down this path, click on the link, I'll get their credit card information. So long story short, a number of people unfortunately fell for that email, went through the phishing process, gave up their credit card information, and then noticed shortly after that their credit card was being used, ostensibly being charged for Lucky Brand products. So people came to the Lucky Brand Facebook page and said, what's going on? Why did you charge me for this shirt? Why did you charge me for these pants? So if you are manning the social media platforms for Lucky Brand, you are all of a sudden looking at, even if it's only a dozen people in an hour, saying the same sort of thing. Imagine the triggers within Lucky Brand that have to be in play. You have to talk to whatever your email vendor is saying, did an email go out? You have to talk to IT and say, is there a data breach? You have to talk to communications. You have to talk to a whole bunch of people before you have any meaningful information to give these people a response. But to Mike's point, you can come out and say, we are noticing, these sorts of emails, we are very concerned and looking into it. You don't say, I'm sorry. You don't say, yes, we made a mistake, because maybe you didn't. And in this particular case, you didn't. My long-winded point, I'm sorry, is that it took them about 3 hours to get a response out. And in that 3-hour arc, more and more people jump on. And the nature of social is such that, and it's a phenomenon, and I hope in 50 years they'll be talking about it in anthropology classes about the advent of social media, but when 10 people, 20 people say something negative on social, the voyeurs, the people watching it, say, well, that looks kind of bad. If 50 people are saying it, all of a sudden the people that weren't directly involved jump on, because it's like, yeah, fight the man, let's join the cause. And so you want to mitigate that initial arc. It's that hockey stick, right? You want to get into the conversation when it's still on the blade part of the hockey stick, because if 50 people are starting to complain, all of a sudden exponentially more people pile on. I think Lucky Brand did an amazing job within 3 hours of being able to come back, given all of the things that they had to do. And I'm totally speculating because we don't represent Lucky Brand. I have no idea what their actual process was. But the 2 points I'm trying to make is, A, human beings, we in social have this expectation, like Lucky Brand is first name Lucky, last name Brand. Yes, I'm right there. And then B, the reality of what it means to be a company today and all of the parts of an organization that need to collectively get together to figure out what actually happened before that you can give a data-based response. But it's very important to give a acknowledgement or a recognition that something actually happened as a response right out of the gate.
Thank you. I think we have time for a few quick questions. Does anyone have one? Yes, here in the front.
How could Donald Sterling have handled his situation?
Who?
how could he have handled it more effectively? And actually, I just would like to hear your thoughts on that, because we've been debating it at the agency because it's obviously a hot topic, especially in LA. But does he apologize? Do people actually believe he's sorry? Because he's racist. So how do you handle that when you're Donald Sterling?
I'm letting Mike take that.
I think I've done about 50 media interviews since the story broke. I've said that some believe that Donald Sterling is the new Paula Deen, in that the apology, the words, aren't enough. And I spoke a little earlier about how you really have to have a repentant heart. And when we as adults forget our own rules because we're kind of in our own world, we need to remember what we teach our kids. It kind of simplifies it, right? You don't want to hear excuses. You want to hear what you did personally. You want to make sure that your kid is responsible for their behavior. Not that Johnny was pulling Sally's hair too on the playground, right? And you want to hear a repentant heart, a change of heart to that behavior, because the ultimate goal is you don't want them to repeat it again. And you want to make sure they understand it in such a way that you as an adult or you as an important stakeholder can walk away and feel comfortable that you've convinced me of that, and I'm going to give you that chance, that social chance, to do so again, to move on with your life. Sterling is a million miles away from that, in my opinion. And the only way, so to quickly answer what would I do differently if he were my client, I would tell him first that until we have proof that your heart has changed, and until we have proof that you're truly sorry, not just because you got caught, but that you've changed your heart, I can't help you.
And I would add one more, I agree with that as well, and I would add one more point to it. Social media is an amazing self-policing state, or I think too many people, perhaps him, perhaps some organizations, don't give people enough credit for having a brain. And think that they can get away with something, make a statement, and that everyone's just going to buy it. While that may be true with a portion of the population, I think there's this collective mindset, the collective mind of social, that's not going to let things fly like that, and is smarter, you know, and eventually the truth rises up. I mean, there's a lot of things about social media that drive me insane, and I don't like and appreciate, and I'm sure you're all there as well. But one thing I do like is kind of that collective filter that disallows things from getting past. Like, no, I'm sorry, we just don't buy that collectively. And it's a fascinating thing to watch, and I think that's some of what's going on.
Yeah? Oh, one more?
I just wanted to ask about making an apology and some of the risks that go along with that. For instance, sometimes you might be bringing more awareness to a situation that might have blown over. And also in like the litigious world that we live in, aren't you setting yourself up for being sued or anything like that? Can you speak to that?
One of the things that I do for a living is train companies in how to handle a social crisis. And what we do is bring all sorts of entities into the room during a crisis simulation. One of those, hopefully, groups that come to the table for the drills is legal, right? And then you have public relations, corporate communications, public affairs, IT, all those groups. And it never ceases to amaze me, having done dozens and dozens of drills, of the dynamic between the communicators, whatever that means, and then the litigious side of the house. Because the innate response is, from the communication side, is we need to apologize, etc. Legal will say, if you apologize, legal often says, if you apologize, it's an indictment of guilt, you know. And it's a fascinating discourse to watch, especially in social media these days, because of the need for speed, as we're talking about, the need to get out there, just being careful how you are stating your empathetic, legitimately genuine, all those words, concern, without suggesting at an early stage that you actually did something wrong, because many times you may not have, and if you say, I'm sorry, then that Facebook post can literally be used in a court of law. And I think that's an incomplete answer. I never am particularly satisfied with either side of the house when they're having that debate internally during those drills, because they both got it right and they both got it wrong, I think. So that's my perspective of having watched a lot of legal counsel discuss this very topic with a lot of communicators is there's still a disparity about which way to go. And I think we're closer than we were even 2 years ago, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement.
There's a tipping point happening. It's happening slowly, but it's happening. Clients, who are the ultimate decision makers, not the attorneys, and it's been the attorney who's had more power than the client, but the client's becoming educated. And the client's understanding that the court of public opinion is as important and many times more important than the court of law. That scares attorneys. They don't like that. They get very upset when you bring that up in a meeting. And I've been in hundreds of situations where I've given the client that counsel immediately. I've given the first day. Lawyer's not going to want me in the meeting. Lawyer's going to say your reputation's not important. Prepare them for all the negatives right out of the box. And then we're in a meeting, and then you have a proper attitude in a meeting where both the attorneys and other stakeholders, including communication, is there, and they show themselves. Not going to allow you to do that. I said, well, there's been many situations, for example, where we've protected the client in the court of law. It's been vetted by a law firm, the communication we're going to have, but it's still helping them from being on the front page of the newspaper. It's allowing them to walk out of their house. Sometimes they show themselves through an argument and say, I don't really care about that. Now then, of course, I have a private meeting with the client and say, you heard directly from your attorney. He does not care about that. There's two things I know that the attorney's going to do. Continue to bill, right? Throw that in their face immediately. Continue to bill. And only think of the advice from the court of law perspective. I do not blame them. That's their training, is what I say. But half of your counsel is sitting over here, and they're saying it's not important. So you as a client have to be more educated and decide if both are important or only one.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question over here.
I just wanted to throw out a quick scenario. If a paid spokesperson for a brand says something controversial, it is not in breach of contract, but it is something that the brand wouldn't align with, and now there's social chatter on that brand's Facebook page or Twitter. How would you recommend that the brand handles that?
It's not, what was the key point there?
It's not in breach of contract.
It's not a breach of,
No, it's just a social media commentary perhaps on a political statement that they have a strong point about, but the brand does not want to talk about politics in any way, perhaps.
David?
Just off the cuff, which is, I guess, my caveat. If this is the wrong answer, then I'm forgiven. I would say that was a mistake made early on in the arrangement with the celebrity, that you didn't do a good job managing that celebrity and what to say and not to say, breach of contract or otherwise. So to go out then and suggest to the public that you wish the celebrity hadn't said that or whatever, I think you'll end up looking worse. And you just have to stomach the fact that you didn't do your job, putting the parameters around media training, whatever it was that caused that hypothetical situation from happening.
A few words: contract. A couple more words: morality clause. I just did a panel just last week in D.C., similar topic, and I had someone from Royal Caribbean Cruises and someone from Aflac that was on the panel with me. The Aflac example is closer to yours, but they had language that allowed them to fire Gilbert Godfrey immediately. What they admitted was that they should have vetted him even more carefully. A few other entities that they trusted had vetted him for other things, but they didn't know how blue he was in some of the things he said in the past. But the contract let him go.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but thanks very much, and thank you for your questions.